Here on the Creative Thinker Podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way. This week on the Creative Thinker Podcast, we're talking to you about showing, not telling, which is a writing phrase that's been around forever. And it basically boils down to making sure that you walk your audience through what is happening in detail and not just giving them set piece by set piece motion like you would on a chessboard, C4 to C5, whatever. Make sure you break it down in a familiar and fun way. So my name is Henry Moon. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined by
Michael Vasquez.
Yeah. So we're happy to have you here, wherever you are around this lovely little globe of ours. India has been showing an uptick in the ratings of listeners.
Dope.
If you're out there in India, hello. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate having you along. So showing, not telling. Let's jump into it.
Absolutely.
There's a very basic analogy that I hear a lot, and it's if a character has a favorite backpack, and it's like a big part of their life, don't just tell us every single thing that is on that backpack. Like, well, okay, they've got this busted zipper and they've got a fancy little thing hanging off of the back of it that's sewn in, that's like a little soccer ball or something, whatever. That's just really breaking down what the appearance is. Instead of showing us what the appearance is, make that backpack a character in the story. Tell us about that backpack. Let that backpack interact with our main character. Have them tell the backpack every day what happened to them, and let them share their truth to this bag, instead of getting bogged down in the minutia of this backpack or these useless details that we really won't remember at the end of the story. Like if I told you somebody had blue jeans and they're their favorite jeans, are you going to remember anything about that tomorrow? No. All right. If I introduce you to this person and they tell you how long they've looked for jeans and they finally found the perfect store where they found their size and it fit perfectly and it just everything about it worked and they love them and they've named them Clarice or something.
Clarice.
Are you going to remember that the next day? You're way more likely to, I'll tell you that.
I'll tell you something as far as speaking specifically to backpacks, I don't know if you've had this experience, but because you're homeschooled. But there were definitely
way to out me, thanks.
Sorry. There were definitely people at school where you could hear the jingle of someone's backpack and you're like, dude, this person's coming through, and you're just gonna hear their backpack because they had all these stuffed animals or whatever that was jingling on their backpack, and so they're usually with a full backpack, go into class and you hear shing, 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 shing. And I think that just really tells a story. Think about, how everyone's backpack told a story in middle school, high school or whatever. Cause I remember even my backpack, I used to have a ton of Freebirds, little pins on it. I used to write on my backpack. I used to have a bunch of weird wonky little stuff, which, still to this day, that's why, I'm going to show it up there. I have stickers on my laptop, right? Because I enjoy adding some flavor and flair to something unique around us. And that's a good show, don't tell, based off of what you have on your backpack or what you have on yourself. What you wear sometimes tells you, or what you have on certain items will tell someone what's important to you. I've got 4 Star Wars stickers on my laptop. You think Star Wars is an important part of my life, or that I'm a Star Wars nerd? For sure. But I don't have to go out and say, I love Star Wars. Look, I got the stickers, So that backpack example really sparked that. Cause think about, even I don't know if TV shows do a good job of showing people's backpacks that are that crazy kind of design that I remember in high school, because I don't really watch a lot of TV shows of high school stuff because I'm over that. I'm out of that part of my life now. But anyways, that really sparked something in me just talking about the backpack right there.
Well, I think there's a simpler example I want to add too, and thank you for sharing. There's a simpler example, which is they use emotions a lot, where it's you say, oh, well, my character is sad. Okay, so Ben is sad. He's crying. Okay, well, that is a very boring way to say that Ben is crying or that Ben is sad. You say, well, he has a tear rolling down his cheek. You have something that expresses like, well, he just wipes his cheek onto his sleeve, and then there's a little wet spot. Okay, that's something that your character can notice. Your character could notice the same wet spot was on his sleeve that was there yesterday, and he
Mhm.
just now sees him crying, so he realizes that this is an ongoing pattern, and now he's concerned.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways to show and not tell. Telling is such a boring way to tell a story.
Mhm.
So I think like being a writer and being that omniscient character in a story is such a I mean, of course, it is incumbent upon you as the writer to be that omniscient character and to know everything about the story and know how it's going to end, know every character's every bit of nuance. It's incumbent upon you to do that, but at the same time, um, you shouldn't be writing notes to yourself when you're writing your story. You should be explaining the story to someone else or writing it in a pretty way.
Mhm.
And so you're not writing like I said, the chess example of like, okay, so Bill stood up in the auditorium and then he walked outside. And he
Mhm.
did that because Charles next to him made him mad. I know
Mhm.
these are terrible names, so just off the top of my head. But anyway, so you don't want to be bogged down in the omniscient details of a story. And that's what happens to so many writers, I feel, is they inhabit this omniscient perspective and they can't just drop back into the story.
Mhm.
I think and a good example I came up with when I was looking at a lot of these articles was the VR goggle example, where it's like if when you're in your omniscient space and you're ready to start writing, then you drop in like you'd be putting on a VR suit, like maybe Ready Player One, like that big haptic suit that covers all of your senses.
Mhm.
You would put that on as the potential audience member.
Mhm.
So instead of like if you had an audience member, a captive person that was not captive, but not held captive, but someone whose attention you held,
Mhm.
um, and you told them, "I'm working on a story. Here I go." Okay, so Bill's in an auditorium. He stands up and he walks outside. Okay, that's not a very good story at all. So what you're gonna want to do
Mhm.
is inhabit that audience member space and show them a beautiful world and just pack in on their senses and show them a good time
Mhm.
and make sure that it is worth their while to sit there and listen. And I think that's a good way to like senses in general are a good way to envision how your audience is going to interact with your story. So like for me, senses are your how your characters interact with your world. So like there is this gap where you as the omniscient person sees all the characters and all the actions. And then between your characters and your actions, and if you're watching, you can see a little gap. Between those two is their five senses.
Mhm.
And that is how they're interacting with the world and how we interact with the world. So as long as you can ground your characters in those senses, then you can create a more believable space where they're touching, feeling, smelling things, and that is leading them to believe certain things about the world around them. And that's better than just okay. Here is the narration. Bill stood up and walked out. Michael, thoughts?
Oh man, I mean, a lot of thoughts, right? I feel like there's always a place and time for aspects of writing. There's a place and a time as you're outlining for Bill to stand up and leave, but then it's your job as a writer to go in and describe and bring those senses to life. Because not to say that Bill stands up, walks out because he's mad out of the auditorium. That's okay as your plot point. Okay, what's going to happen here, and really describing it. Why is he in the auditorium, and start asking those questions like, why is he in the auditorium? Let's get into the senses, right? Let's say for some reason I'm thinking of my high school basketball team. I'm thinking that maybe because of the backpack reference, right? So I'm thinking he's in the bleachers, maybe not an auditorium, maybe a gymnasium. So he's in the bleachers. It's loud. There's the squeaking of basketball shoes on the wooden floor. There's that smell of the wooden floor, like a gym floor.
That reverberance of the basketball that sort of
The
comes out
boom,
like as a wave.
boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, boom. There's whistles going on. There's buzzers happening. And then, whatever's happening between Bill and Charles is going on. But even just that, now we have audio texture going on into what's happening on the scene. Even though our readers aren't actually there, hopefully we can convey just the auditory sound, because I think that's really hard to convey an auditory sound to someone who's reading.
Yeah, and it's one thing to say that Bill is mad at Charles and he left. Okay. And it's another to say, even with that texture of like in the middle of a basketball game with all the smells, all the sounds, that Bill got mad at Charles and left. Okay, so
Yeah.
now we have a picture of like, okay, why isn't he going after him? Well, maybe it's too loud in there. Maybe people are cheering and it's just not worth his effort to try to yell over that. There's so much contextual layering that goes on just because we've added where they're at and what's going on. So that's why I'm saying like there's always going to be more words. So like if you're somebody who struggles to put words on a page, which I was for a long time, then if you start adding context, and if you start adding the senses, if you start adding the surroundings and the pertinent information that really grounds your reader, or your audience member, your player, whatever, you're going to have a lot more words on the page, and it's going to feel a lot more grounded and realistic. So it's like it's just another added benefit to pursuing this idea of showing, not telling. So I typed up this little example, and forgive me again. This is my writing, and I'm just trying to show in another. The more examples we see, usually the easier it is for us to understand the example and understand exactly what the presenter is talking about. So this is just another attempt at showing you what I mean. So in this first paragraph, it's going to be very much just telling you what is going on structurally as that like omniscient character.
Do you want me to read that first paragraph?
Yeah, please.
Okay. It was a cold day, and even the sun wouldn't warm it. Thomas stood as tall as he could under his heavy coats and pack, but the weight was beginning to pull him down. He had miles left to go, and he was starting to feel like he would never make it to the research station, his only hope of survival.
Okay, so that's the first example. It gives you have to fill in something. If you're picturing anything, it's because you filled it in. The only thing in there is that it's cold out and he has a long way to go. There's really no descriptors. This is where he is on the board. His character piece is miles from his character destination. That's it. That's all we hear. That's all we know. So, again, anything that you're visualizing is because you brought it yourself. This next paragraph, I spent a lot more effort into creating his impression of the world, what he's looking forward to, things like that. So it should give you a much clearer picture. So I want you, before you hear this next paragraph, really solidify that picture in your mind. Whatever you pictured for that first paragraph, hold it really tightly, remind yourself what it is, show yourself what it is, because I want you to compare it to what you're visualizing at the end of the second paragraph. If you would, take it away, Michael.
It was a trick of the mind that Thomas used to warm his thoughts, something his mind served up from a work conference on finding peace throughout the day. When he closed his eyes, he heard a pleasant breeze and saw the golden glow of the sun that showed through his eyelids, and he imagined the welcoming arms of Chandra at the door of the research station that must be just over the hill. It was so near he could almost smell fresh MREs. Was this optimism? The realist in him couldn't bear it. The sharp numbness in his face and left arm were tickled down, and he couldn't lie or imagine his way out of the miles of ice that lay untraversed ahead of him. When his eyes opened, all they beheld was the white wastelands. His pack dug into his shoulders, and he found himself wishing for an end. That steady voice in the back of his mind forced him onward.
Okay, so that's a lot more in depth. That tells us a lot more of what our character is looking forward to. It tells us why our character is making this journey, what's pushing him forward. It outlines the world in this contrasting between, okay, he's envisioning it being warm and hopeful, and that he has a possibility of living, even though when we sort of zoom out and he opens his eyes, we realize he has no hope at all, right?
Mhm.
So it's way more grounding. What did you envision of that, and how was that different from the first paragraph? Because to me, the first one is like, okay, I can see your generic picture of Antarctica for the first one. And then for the second one, it's like, oh, okay, it's a way bigger landscape. It's not like a picture. It's like this is difficult terrain.
I wasn't even picturing like Antarctica on the first one. I was picturing something that was like still like grasslands. Like I think of there's a scene in Vikings, the TV show, where Bjorn goes out and has to like survive on his own for a little bit, and he ends up like killing a bear or something. But it's like this kind of area where it's hilly. I kind of picture like what I've seen pictures of Alaska, right? There's trees out, but there's snow mounds. But it's not a vast wasteland of nothingness like I would imagine Antarctica is, where there's like no trees or no nothing out there, except for the government. I would just imagine that it's just my first picture is like there are woods around. He has a long way to go. There are hills that he has to traverse to get there, and it might be. You said he had miles left, so 4 or 5 days of him just like having to trudge through this is what I pictured for the first one.
Nice. What about for the second one?
Um, no woods. And what I pictured is like almost like an anime scene where this guy closes his eyes and he has this like vision of home, of like, okay, I can picture someone like giving me a hug at the where you say imagine being welcome in the arms of Chandra at the door. It's like, okay, I'm here. It's not home. It's kind of this metallic research station. But it's like, oh man, I can smell fresh MRE. So I'm expecting like military or some type of government entity. See, I was right. Antarctica government.
Yeah.
So and then when you said he opened his eyes and beheld it was a white wasteland, it's like having his this vision of like warmth, happiness, and family, or just warm arms, and then opening it's like the cut of like the harsh cold winter, and like the wind's howling, and the ice is like he's got, let's say he's got a beard and it's like full of ice, and he's probably got everything covered. So I expected like a wasteland. This guy's not gonna make it, or he's barely gonna make it. It's kind of what I picture.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for that. I think that the point here is that there's way more information in that second one. Because we are not just moving set pieces around. We're seeing what they want. We're seeing how they interact with the world around them. We're seeing, what their hope and dream in the future is, as well as their senses in the world around them. So I think, said another way, it's one paragraph without any sensation and one paragraph with sensation. So we can really build out that second paragraph. We can really add a lot of information and just go nuts on the explanation. It starts to get a little bit emotional when you feel that hard stop of like, oh my gosh, he's without any of that. He wants comfort and it's gone. And he has to go on, but why? There's no joy in him going forward, right? And this is just because we've added sensation to the paragraph. And so that's as clear as mud, I'm sure. But that gives you another example of why it is important to show what a character is going through and what their sensations are to your viewer, to your audience member, because it allows them a window into their world. It lets them empathize. It lets them put themselves there and say, "Oh my gosh, this is so sad." And that's a beautiful thing. That's what art is for, especially the visual and written, right? So yes, one of the other things that's really great about that is you can really add a lot of pacing if
Yeah.
you if you're adding in all these sensations and stuff. Stephen King does this to great effect. I talk about him all the time because he's awesome. Everybody knows that. But he does a great job of pacing his stories, and he does that by basically we watch the characters sweat. We get to see them interact with each bit of new information and realize all the way down the anxiety spiral to what that action is going to end up creating, or changing, how that action is going to change their place in the world. So he does a great job with pacing, and it's because he goes way, 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 way down the list of what characters are sensing and feeling. My question for you, Michael, is in D&D. So we talked about writing. In D&D, how can we show instead of tell?
Well, I think it's very easy in D&D to get into that tell. Well, like what's happening in the tavern. This person's going here. This person's here. Okay, this is what's going on. Especially if you're a visual person and you want to like get a drawing of the tavern and what's going on and who's there, or if you're in a combat situation, like who's here, what's going on there. But the show is so much more to like immerse you into this role playing game. And remind me of your question before I start going on to this train of thought that I'm going through.
I love it. How do we show and not tell in D&D? How do we make our campaigns more immersive? I guess is really
exactly what you said before. Is we're starting to hit the senses, and we're starting to let players feel the vibe that you're trying to bring in, right? So we talked about my inspiration was the last week or the previous week, music, right? Music can really set the tone, the vibe. I think for some of our Halloween episodes or games that we do, I end up having kind of a creepy vibe, creepy music playing. I kind of set the tone with more slow paced and kind of weird observations that they'll see, but I'm hitting the senses of sight, right? So they're seeing weird things. Smell, I think, is something that gets missed, but we often know what a certain smell is going to be like. Stale beer, right? If you're talking about a tavern and you have the stale beer kind of smell, that kind of gives you an idea of, oh, is this place like a rowdy tavern? Does it smell more like in the corners? Does it smell at the bar?
Did they just not clean it?
Yeah, did they just not clean it? Touch, like, or if you go up and you grab a drink, it's like you can describe the character is grabbing the drink, and when they grab it, the cup is like sticky and like overflowing, and then like the wood, you know how the wood can get like beer sticky. You're like, oh, your arm feels a little sticky now and gross. Smells, sounds, I think is another good one. You can, in a tavern, play tavern music, or whatever kind of music you want to get playing, and you can say, we have some bards playing, and that's the music you're listening to, and that creates a more of an immersion because there's like bards there, just like in Star Wars, the cantina scene where I think that's the one that they're playing. But anyways, when they're playing in Mos Eisley, you see them, they have a band there, and that's the music that's being listened to in the story. So it's creating that mood. What we got? Sight, smell, touch.
Oh my goodness.
What are the senses?
Sight, smell, touch, taste.
Taste. Yeah, I mean, taste.
No,
I think that's a good one too. Like you can really get into the food of the setting.
Hearing too. Yeah.
So you can get into the taste of the food that you're getting. I think one of the more recent NPCs I've brought to the Electric Dragon, which is your tavern that you own in our game, is a guy who's very good at cooking. He's a swole jack dude, and he takes cooking very seriously. And it was just an interesting, fun character dynamic to bring in. And so it creates this whole kind of atmosphere in your D&D game. And I think that's something that can immerse the characters a lot more by just describing casually the senses that are happening, because I know as an amateur DM, I wouldn't always do that, and that would lead to a different vibe that I'm trying to go for.
Well, so to that specific tavern, to break down that specific tavern, we've gone there so many times in the story, and each time we go in there, we've gone in there when it's so busy and the workers are anxious,
Hmm.
and we've gone in there when it's very jovial and fun. We've gone in there when it's packed and
Yeah.
it's crazy, and we just had a major win for the city. All these different occasions when we've entered the building, the first wave of feelings that hits us are different. However, we know people that are working.
Hmm.
And that's what I think is so cool about D&D is like you're checking in with friends.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, they're just the DM using different voices, but because you in this case,
Yeah.
they do such a good job of changing voices and telling stories. You don't think of it that way. You go into the tavern and you visit a friend of yours inside the game, and you get to talk to them and see how they're reacting towards the mess. And maybe they're really excited that there's a lot of people in here. And yeah, everybody else is stressed out, but this person is good. So I figure I'm going to hang out for a while longer. Or
Mhm.
maybe they have a tip on somebody across the bar that wants to talk to me or something. You know,
Yeah.
there is a community that is built in D&D if you are able to create bravely enough to use the senses and
Mhm.
to allow those friendships to grow and continue to show people um, the merits of other people that they interact with.
Hmm.
I think that's really the beauty of what you do as a DM is all of these characters. I know we've talked about it at length, where you talk about how you draw inspiration from people you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you do that to such great effect that even if you don't change your voice and you're just like, oh yeah, this is this person's name and they have this habit, and you're talking to them now, and
Mhm.
and so even if you haven't had enough time to prep all the rest that you would normally, they all feel very fresh and new
Hmm.
and exciting, and like somebody that you could get along with, have a beer with, hang out with, go on a quest, whatever.
And a lot of that, like you said, like taking the different NPCs, is just people watching. And I think I've said it before, just people watch. And not that I encourage making fun of people, but we do imitate. I think there's a scene, and I want to say it's like The Other Guys or some other movie with what's his name, Mark Wahlberg in it. I think it's him, and he's like freaking out because his girlfriend's going to ballet classes, and he ends up showing up at the ballet class, and he starts imitating the ballet dancer, but very, very good, very well. And he starts doing like twirls and stuff like that. And it's like, it's interesting to see how making fun of people or imitating people is something that we tend to do anyways. But why not do it in a creative way? Why not we do it in an encouraging way where you can imitate people? Whenever you're talking about someone else in a voice, you can go, no, we don't need to do that. We'll just wait until somebody else gets here. So like that kind of like hesitation is imitating someone else at work. How you hold your posture, especially as a storyteller, how you hold your posture, it means and can convey different emotions. It can get you into that headspace of the improving another NPC, and just that different stance that you're taking, or that different body position that you're getting into, conveys something to the players, conveys something to the people that are watching you. If I'm kind of down like this the entire time, that would convey a different emotion than being up tall and talking loudly, I guess.
What you would do for a more confident character, more loud character, more
Yeah.
Animalistic almost, is just big, loud, not really impervious to the world around them.
Mhm.
And all of this, again, this is D&D we're talking about right this moment, but all this stuff is about immersion in your story and immersing yourself.
Mhm.
So it's like letting go of that omniscient perspective, letting go of that control aspect almost, where it's like, yeah, maybe my character wants this the most, but that's not going to be the first thing they talk about.
Mhm.
Maybe like if I'm trying to talk someone into something using dialogue, I'm going to say, hey, how you doing? Like, I want to check in with what was your last quest like? Did it turn out good? Is there anything I can buy off of you? Like I want to charm my way to the question of will you do something for me, whatever. So it's not always about getting there in a very straightforward and non-messy way, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So with that, let's jump into our inspiration for this week. Michael, what has been inspiring you, sir, as we have taken another week of the Creative Thinker podcast? I think we're up to 32 episodes this year, by the way.
Oh, dang. There we
Yeah.
go. That's what's up. What has been inspiring me the podcast and talking to other people about the podcast. We've said before, we caught a lot of flack for the Harry Potter episode and
Still,
the
man,
magic systems that we talked about. And
I almost took it down.
I talked to my wife about it, and she had just listened to it, and she was like, I have a disagreement, or kind of a what did she say? I'm going to be coming in hot about one topic. That's not the right term. I can't remember. But anyways, she was like, this little definition on like hard and soft magic, like how did you come to that definition? And what does that mean? And it still is hard magic. And we had a little bit of a disagreement there, but it was nice to hear the conversation. And we started the conversation about creativity. And we talked about last episode about taking constructive criticism and being able to use that and not take it personally. And I was able to be like, okay, you know what? We talked about Harry Potter. That wasn't the point of the podcast, so I didn't research Harry Potter. But now I know. Next time I bring up Harry Potter and anything about the world, I'm going to research, because damn, we got that wrong.
Yeah, we did.
But you know, everyone's got their own opinion about how magic systems work and soft magic, hard magic. So it was really interesting to hear that she had her different thoughts on it, and then it kind of grew into a thought. She has a Bible study in the mornings, and I just posed the question, like, you know, what other topics would you like for us to talk about? And that ended up, for me, trying to give them time to think. We started talking about that because Molly was talking about it already. So we were able to continue talking about magic systems, their opinion on Harry Potter, and well, the nuances of Harry Potter and this. And it was refreshing to hear people talk about the podcast that we're talking about, people listening to it, and for them to give their opinions and give us ideas on topics. It was inspiring, one, because we already got a long list of topics now that we can put in the queue. But yeah, so that's what really was inspiring me this week. And it just made it feel more like, okay, there's a little bit more oomph behind, or a little more desire to do even more research on the topics that we're already doing.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that anytime we get to talk to you guys about the podcast, anytime you have suggestions about things you want to hear or questions about things that we talked about, if it just so happens that, you know, because a part of creating is about having a really great foundation or group of people that you can bounce ideas off of. If you just happen to be one of those people that's not fortunate enough to have that group, I mean, we'd love to answer any and all questions you have about the podcast. It's really fun to talk about creativity. That's why we're here. So we're really grateful to have those conversations anytime that we can. So I'm glad that you were able to have those conversations, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I used this as an inspiration before, but I got to watch the D&D movie again with my family.
Yeah.
And it's
cool.
And it's really funny seeing people react to it who don't know any of the inside jokes, I guess, of D&D, and that they enjoyed the movie too. And it was also like just the D&D movie as a whole, seeing it, I guess the whole game personified or portrayed in a way that makes sense to someone else. It was just really cool, because it's like, it's the same game that we're all playing, all of us D&Ders.
Yeah.
It's the same game we're all playing, but the quests are also different. The groups that we play with are also different. And what it came down to in that story was that this is a close-knit group of people. And that is the main story of D&D. And then there's all the jokes about the paladin being super preachy and annoying, and like the bard is kind of like, he makes plans and he's never good at anything after that, you know, just stuff. You know, the wizard rolls badly when he needs to roll well, you know, like stuff like that, where it's like he comes in clutch sometimes. But there's all these jokes that are sort of inside stuff, but what it comes down to is that there's this game that brings people together and helps people tell stories.
Mhm.
And I think that's such a beautiful thing, and it's something that is lost to our culture to some degree. It's like we've cheapened it with movies, and it's not, people sitting around a campfire telling stories anymore, trying to get each other scared or excited, or it's just not what it used to be
Mhm.
in terms of human storytelling. And it's not like we see one performance that is polished down to the nth degree, whereas like going to the theater is one of my favorite things to do. I don't get to go very, like often enough, but um just being in the room with somebody, it's like it's the same almost experience as D&D, where it's like, yeah, this person is wearing this Halloween costume that was probably $10, but they're acting their hearts out, and then it's a really impactful story.
Mhm.
And I find the human element of storytelling to be incredibly inspiring, and D&D is just one of the many great ways to tell stories among people, and it's been a great part of my life. So that movie was a reinvigoration of those feelings, and that's what's been inspiring me lately.
Nice, nice.
So to jump back in to our show don't tell, there was a couple more specific examples I wanted to ask you about, like um, in D&D,
Mhm.
there were some moments, especially magic items. I know we just talked about that a couple weeks ago, so
Yeah.
it's still present in the mind. Um, especially with magic items where you gave us very little information. We're like looting this place, and then we happen upon Avaros being one of those items. Could you tell us a little bit about that, or the folks listening, because I played it already?
Yeah. So Avaros and Gladriel were both swords, and I think we talked about them in the previous episodes. But how y'all ended up getting to them was y'all defeated a certain enemy. There was two, I guess, like knights or whatever that y'all defeated, and they grabbed their weapon. And then you were able to start using the weapon. But when you grabbed the weapon and once you finally attuned to it, it was described as this, very polished weapon. And in combat, they did certain things to you guys. I'm not sure if you all remember, but that does what it does. It hit you, and you couldn't regain hit points if you failed to save. Which you have a cleric who tries to heal you guys, and she wasn't able to heal you in combat because of this specific weapon. Y'all picked it up and were able to continue using it, but as you picked it up and attuned to it, it began to slowly like talk to you and kind of push you towards like, do it, kill them, just take their life, nobody will know. Just it tried to push you a little bit more towards like the evil side. And yeah, it eventually began to talk to you and would talk to you every now and then. And when you would get kills with it, it would be like, oh yeah, that's good. That's good. Good job. Or like, you had a good kill. Let's do that again. And then I think at certain points it was like you needed to make a save, or else it was going to try and cause you to attack your own party members.
Yeah, and I think that was, I mean, that was a really fun story arc. Just as a player, it was
Mhm.
really fun.
Yeah.
But also, like, that's a great version of showing instead of telling. You could say, well, this is a possessed blade,
Yeah.
and you feel like it's probably a little bit magical. Like, you probably wouldn't pick it up. I'm not
Yeah.
super adventurous when I'm playing D&D, at least not as much as I should be. So
And
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think if it's somebody wants to watch like an example of that, I believe again, Critical Role, Grog picks up a sword. Or you can look up on YouTube Grog, cursed magical weapon. I can't remember the name of the blade, but he goes also through an arc of this blade and talking through it, and it kind of doing similar things. I took aspects of that encounter that he has with the blade, and it's funny. It's very funny the way that they do it and how the player that plays as Grog handles the situations. But I definitely took inspiration from that because again, it wasn't touted as this evil sword. It was the description of the sword. It was held by someone who was evil, and they ended up taking it, and then the talks started happening. It wasn't again described this cursed item, you cannot let go of, and da 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 da. So that's a good example of it if you want to see like the full kind of story arc of that sword.
And the point here being that the more freedom you allow your audience to inject themselves into the story, the more they're going to feel at home there, the more they're going to imagine, the more they're going to enjoy. Because you're allowing them to, especially with D&D, inject themselves. Like if you tell them exactly what this sword is, then suddenly they have a reaction that they are almost manufactured, that they have to have. Like this is an evil sword. Oh no, an evil sword.
Yeah.
Instead of this is an interesting sword, and it looks like it does a lot of damage, and definitely did a lot of damage to you. And then you pick it up, and then it's whispering evil nothings into your ear.
Yeah.
Then that becomes a very different experience. Then you can decide how your character reacts to that. You have a lot more freedom in how you wish to behave at that point. And especially with D&D, you want to make sure that your players have a lot of freedom and are able to build the story in the way that they see fit. And so that's the crux of Show Don't Tell. It's about taking your authoritarian stance out of your writing or your storytelling. It's about showing the world and giving free choice. I think I don't want to get into religion much, but if you want to talk about life, and if you want to say that God made life, which I believe, but to each their own, and then say, well, okay, I'm going to imitate that. I'm going to write a story, and the only thing I'm going to leave out is freedom of choice. Well, that's not going to be a very realistic story, because that's not we get to make our own choices, whether you believe it's God or whoever, who or whatever that made the world. If you're making your own world and you leave out that personal choice and you don't let your characters affect the world, then it's not going to be very believable. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Michael?
Kind of taking it off the whole creation.
Yeah.
But
was that too much?
No, it's good. Just my brain was going somewhere else. We created a magic item a couple weeks ago. Again, this goes perfect with the Show Don't Tell. It was the Rowenian breastplate armor that we talked about, and how we created it, and kind of the vibe that goes with it is the kills that you get the blood print, handprint, or the paw print on the breastplate on the armor, and it becomes part of your part of your status in Rowan. That is an amazing Show Don't Tell, because as adventurers come into Rowan, they might be greeted with these people who have different blood handprints or paw prints on their armor, and they're not going to say nothing about it, So when these adventurers come in, it's like you see a group of 3 or 4 people heading towards you. They have these black breastplate armors. It looks like they have fur lining on the armor, and there are what looks to be handprints. None of them are the same. There's one that seems to be the one in front, has this giant paw print, but it's all red and in blood on their armor. And like, that's intimidating. If your adventuring party comes up to that, and these people, are lean, muscular, coming in, and these are the hunters, these are the protectors of Rowan. And so that's an amazing Show Don't Tell thing that we did a couple weeks ago, which we didn't even realize that we did it at the time. But that's just a great thing about storytelling.
For sure. I think that brings us to the end of Show Don't Tell. But before we close out the episode, we do have this website that we found that has some more examples that we just wanted to read to end up the episode. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So we'll read through these 4 and just leave you with that thought, so that you can have some other writers' examples of what showing instead of telling looks like to them. So it's not just us. We want to give you a nice wide swath of information. So
and the website is Jerry Jenkins. Again, Jerry Jenkins? Yeah. And the title of the article is Show Don't Tell What You Need to Know. That was actually published a couple weeks ago.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Jerry.
So, going down, like you said, there are 4 excerpts from different authors that we would like to read because they're authors. They got it down. They've got their stuff published. Some of these are famous books. Some of them I've never heard of, but I've heard of the author. So, here we go.
Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. This is an excerpt. The hay field beyond the beaten dirt of the school playground stood pant-waist high, and the heads of grass were turning yellow from need of cutting. The teacher was a round little old man, hairless and pink of face. He owned but one rusty black suit of clothes and a pair of old, overlarge dress boots that curled up at the toes and were so worn down that the heels were wedge-like. He stood at the front of the room, rocking on the points. Obviously, that paints a very specific picture.
Yeah.
And it makes you think that this teacher has had a pretty rough go of it, and he's probably retirement ready and wants to get out of there.
The next excerpt is from The Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. In this novel, Dr. John Watson's observation of Sherlock Holmes could have been boring, but notice how Doyle handles it. So swift, silent, and furtive were his movements, like those of a trained bloodhound picking out the scent, that I could not but think what a terrible criminal he would have made had he turned his energy and sagacity against the law instead of exerting them in its defense. Aside from me messing up, that's a good thought.
Yes. Okay. And of course, you've heard of The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien, our second to last. The gasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and gray, as if the mountains had vomited the filth of their entrails upon the lands about. High mounds of crushed and powdered rock, great cones of earth fire blasted and poison stained, stood like an obscene graveyard in endless rows, slowly revealed in the reluctant light. If that doesn't paint a picture, I don't know what does.
For real, though.
Showing, not telling.
Last excerpt we'll read, The Beloved by Toni Morrison. Morrison's brilliantly, oh my God.
Morrison brilliantly condenses years into one paragraph of narrative summary, which is as follows.
Men and women were moved around like checkers. Anybody baby Suggs knew, let alone loved, who wouldn't have run off or been hanged, got rented out, loaned out, bought up, brought back, stored up, mortgaged, won, stolen, or seized. So baby's 8 children had 6 fathers. What she called the nastiness of life was the stock she received upon learning that nobody stopped playing checkers just because the pieces included her children.
Dang, yeah. That is a pretty sweet little intro. I mean, that I picked up, what is it, 12 Angry Men? No, To Kill a Mockingbird the other day. That's what I picked up. And it's, there's such a beauty to writing that in any teen books, of course, any modern writing is sort of fallen by the wayside. It's very just so emotionally written. And it wasn't until recently going through older books versus newer books, especially because I've been kind of going through the history of sci-fi a little bit. Good sci-fi of old to now, and just the way they've woven in these very human stories. And one thing I've noticed is that the writing of old is so emotional, and it paints a picture almost before you know that it is, and it feels so homey. It's like you melt away into this vat of molasses, and it's just like they start feeding you story, and it's like, oh wow, this is amazing. It's such an interesting experience to read beautiful writing. I highly encourage anybody to read the greats for sure. And as you do, think about whether or not they're showing or telling.
Mm-hmm.
And every time, maybe not every time, but think of it occasionally, whether or how you would change either case. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Creative Thinker Podcast. We're thrilled to be here. Please check us out on Instagram and YouTube and just hit us up. We love talking to you. And if you want to support the podcast, that option is always out there.
And if you have any topics that you would like for us to talk about, rant about, spend a little bit of time on, definitely let us know either on the YouTube comments or on Instagram DMs, because we love to hear what you are thinking and what your opinions are about certain subjects. And we want to talk about something different that's different than our minds, right? The exponential creation process. Different topics will help us spark your different thoughts on what you wanted us to talk about, and we might change it into a different way. So definitely send us your topics that you would love for us to talk about.
Absolutely. Wherever you are on this wonderful little globe of ours, you take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.